First of all, I would like to welcome everybody on behalf of Ovivo, and my name is Elena Bailey. I'm with Ovivo. I would like to introduce to you the panel members, but before I do that, I would like to mention this is our 22nd year of doing this type of workshops, and it started right here in Chicago. And I want to recognize Dr. Glenn Diker, who was with me. I had the honor and the privilege to do it back then, and here he is again. Thank you, Patty, as well, for coming. The main goal, it was actually his idea to develop a workshop that it will be challenging and provocative, to use his words. And the topic this year is exactly that. So if you're a panelist on these workshops, you have the freedom to basically have no boundaries. And hopefully we would demonstrate that tonight. So keeping with that in mind, this topic is definitely provocative and I understand very controversial. So the industry is divided and a lot of our colleagues, they have very strong feelings one way or another. So we selected a panel that not only was knowledgeable, but was willing to take all the tough questions too. So keep that in mind when we're going through this, that we put a lot of thought into the complexity of this topic. And with that, I would like to welcome first Mark Alpert. He is, I'm gonna bring in the panel. So if you guys welcome Mark. He is the Executive Director of the Water DesignBuild Council, and he will guide us for the best practices for each collaborative models, if you choose to do a collaborative model. Manny, coming up. Manny Moncholi, he is the Division Chief and Senior Program Manager for Miami-Dade, and he represents a large utility in the eastern United States, you know Miami-Dade. He has experience with multiple projects, but mainly in the fixed price design build, as well as P3. Thank you, Manny. Derek Velarde, he is the wastewater program manager of Salt Lake City, and he represents a large customer in the western United States, but he has experience on CMAR mainly, and they just selected a very large project that way. And finally, Trey Arnett, he is the president and principal engineer for Arnett Environmental, and he represents the small to medium communities that they have mainly focused for a number of years on progressive design build. So please welcome. So we've done a survey, and these are my notes. Highlighted is where you guys responded. And thank you for responding. That was very helpful. We kind of guessed it correctly with Mark that it will be progressive, construction management at risk, and fixed price will be the main three that you guys wanted to hear. So all of our speakers have an expertise in one area or another. And so our goal is for Mark to address all of the different models, and then we go through the different questions. I also want to say that some of you sent me some questions that you wanted to remain anonymous. And I have no problem with that, because I'm willing to ask those questions for you, because they're very controversial. So hopefully, if I ask the questions, you guys will feel comfortable, so when they have the mics for the open mic questions, you can also ask the panels. And they agreed, at least the top 10, because I'm a top 10 person, if you don't know me yet, they agreed to answer those questions. And I think you will be pleased. So with that, Mark, if you can lead the discussion.
Sure. Everyone has a copy of the program. Take a look on the back. It's a bunch of funny looking circles. There's a key to all the colors. And the intent of this circles, this is included in a copy of the handbook that our Water Design Build Council is giving to each one of you this evening. These are all the delivery methods that we're going to be talking about. And we're focused construction management at risk, progressive design build, fixed price, and P3. So all of you, I'm sure every utility in the country uses public bidding, design bid build. And what happened when, it's about 20, 25 years ago, and I know it spans my early career at my former employer with Glenn many years ago, owners wanted some different approach, and they wanted to utilize different methods. So the first method they used, which was really a transitional method, is construction management at risk. And in that delivery method, there's still a design engineer selected, however the community has their requirements, and there's a construction manager at risk. In most cases, that's a construction firm. And that construction manager at risk, or CMAR as we call it here in these figures, is selected very much like a professional services procurement, with one exception. They not only include the services that they provide, and it's a two-phase effort. They do pre-construction, constructability, they support value engineering, and they do open book estimating in that early phase of the work. So construction management at risk was a transition. And it is a two-phase delivery method. So phase one incorporates all of those, and in the procurement, most communities include some limited pricing information in those initial phase one proposals. It may include the fee or the markup, it may include the pre-construction services, and it may include the general conditions that are incorporated into their scope of work. If successful at the end of phase one, that success means they have a price and a scope that match the owner's budget. More often than not, they move to phase two, which is construction of the particular project. So moving in this direction to the next delivery method, progressive design build, there is one distinct difference between CMAR and progressive design build. That is, it's a design build delivery method, a single point of accountability, so it's an integrated design and construction team. And in their phase one services in progressive design build, it not only includes all of those services that were in CMAR, but it includes the services related to design. And the design progresses to whatever level of detail the owner believes is necessary to refine the definition of the project and the design such that a price can be delivered to the owner at the end of phase one. If that price, once again, matches the owner's budget and its scope intentions, then the owner has a price for the design and construction of the project, and that will allow them to move to phase two, which will complete the design, the permitting, the construction of the project. Then there's fixed price design build, which was the first delivery method that I encountered when design build became very common. And managed utility represents that, and there are many utilities in the country that use that delivery method. It was and is still a very major part of that delivery method. There is a difference. Owners, in that case, have an owner's advisor, and the owner advisor helps the owner develop, in some cases, design criteria package. In other cases, a more detailed, some may refer to that as a bridging document. Some may go even further in the prescriptive nature. I know what I want, and they may be very specific about systems, technology, vendors, processes, and so forth. But with that package and everything else that goes along with the procurement, the response to a RFP would be a fixed price, not unlike public bidding. So that fixed price would match a scope of work that has to align with what is in the procurement documents. So those are the three collaborative delivery methods that are the principal discussion this evening. And then to this direction over here is P3. And the P3 delivery method incorporates any of those collaborative delivery methods. And when P3 was beginning to be utilized in the US, it only included fixed price design build and a form of O&M. Now most P3s include design, build, and operate functions in their delivery method. But there are many approaches to P3, some of which are concessions, some of which bring private financing, some of which merely outsource those services for a community, for a specific project, but incorporate any one of these delivery methods here into their delivery. So those are the spectrum of delivery methods we're going to speak to tonight, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mark. Any comments, guys, at this point? No? You're good? Okay, Derek, I think the next question is probably down your alley. You've done a lot of work on procurement between collaborative models and our standard design. So the question was, can you expand on the understanding of the differences? And I think we agree that the audience was very clear that they want to know about the procurement, number one. We got over 70% of you that wanted to know that. The contracting process, which very, very close second, and then risk allocation. So with that, if you can take a shot at addressing all three of them,
yeah,
I think that will be of interest.
First of all, I want to say it's a privilege to be here, and thank you very much for having me. So some of the big differences, I guess, between design, bid, build and the collaborative models, really, I guess, is inferred in the name, first of all. It's the collaborative nature of it. And it's not necessarily that design, bid, build isn't collaborative, but it's more when that collaboration takes place, and it's more informing the design and prior to actually execution of that construction contract, which also helps to kind of manage some of the risk and actually kind of include some, I'd say, innovations within some of those designs. As far as the procurement, I think before you can even get to some of that, you really have to kind of talk about the contracting and the risk factors, because when evaluating whether or not it makes sense to do a collaborative method, at least in the state of Utah, it's actually a requirement that the owner actually evaluates, one, the risks of the project, but also the actual, I'm going to say, risk acceptance of the owner. Through that process, basically, it kind of starts to lead you to what that appropriate delivery method really is, and starts to kind of lead you in a certain direction based upon that risk profile. A good example, I guess, is with the Salt Lake City project we currently have going on. That's really what kind of drove us to the CMAR process, was because there was a certain level of risk that we really needed to address, and some of those had to do with, say, scheduling constraints and where we were just within the process itself, budgetary constraints and how we were going to actually manage that, but also it really had to do with, I'm going to say, operational concerns and how we'd actually start addressing some of the operational criteria that our operators really thought was going to be important. So once that decision's made as far as what you really want to do or what your risk profile is, really it's kind of taking evaluation and looking at each one of those options as far as what the risk associated with each one is. CMAR, for example, there's a lower risk than design, bid, build, but it's not risk-free. The contractor's still held to a standard of care. And really the risk is managed more through the phase one services and things like schedule management, budget management as far as those budget models, and subcontracting. So the contracts themselves actually differ too, and as kind of Mark had defined, with the CMAR process and in the instance of Salt Lake City, we're actually contracted both with a design firm as well as a construction firm. That's a little bit different with design build, which is also what kind of shifts some of the risk to the design build team, because with the design build itself, your response, or basically you put together those bridging documents, and the contractor then becomes responsible, or not just the contractor, but the design build team becomes responsible for that overall delivery and to basically meeting that performance criteria. That's really what kind of allows for that transfer of risk in a lot of ways. Is really that kind of performance criteria that builds into it. So I mention all this because once you actually have an acceptance of what that risk is and how it feeds into everything, you can then start to take a look at contracting as well as the procurement process, because the big difference between design, bid, build and collaborative delivery models really has to do with a best value practice, and not necessarily taking a low bid. This really was important to Salt Lake City because it gave us, I'm going to say, the ability to kind of select our contractor really based upon qualifications, And that process was kind of outlined in such a way that we went through and we did qualifications-based selection. In the interim, while we're doing those qualifications selections, we actually developed the general conditions for the project that actually went out with the RFP package. And in that RFP package, we were asking for both an approach to the project as well as the pricing associated with the general conditions and overhead and profit, because the way we were managing this process or this project really was through a cost-plus model, where we were actually going through, we were looking at the cost of work itself and then applying those markups to that cost of work. Now, it's not just the cost of work, there was also our ability to manage some of that risk through some of the allowances and contingencies that we were building into it that brought us to basically a guaranteed maximum price and kind of put a cap. But that procurement process kind of differs from the design-build process in a lot of ways in that you're really going out and producing these bridging documents that actually go out and provide you with performance criteria that then you send out along with an RFP package after the qualifications. However, that evaluation still tends to be kind of the same in a lot of ways, because once those bridging those RFPs come back with the performance criteria, your design-build team, which actually consists of the designer as well as the contractor, and that can be mixed as far as who's leading it or whether they become joint ventures, for example, that process basically still allows for the owner to make a best value determination based upon the designs that are presented, as well as the cost that's associated with it. So it gives you both the ability to look at qualifications, designs that are presented, as well as the cost, and basically make that best value determination. From my perspective, one of the big differences, and I would say cautionary tales with collaborative methods, is really some of the front-end work that goes into procuring some of these contracts. When you're going out for a design, bid build package, you have your designer working with with the owner. You get that design set and in place, and then you bid it, and that's kind of where you are, and the collaboration happens after that. But in the instance of, the collaborative model, I mean, you can actually get some of this input right up front, but in order to get that procurement all set and kind of pulled together, it takes a really significant effort, whether it's in the instance of design, bid, build, and the bridging documents, or in the instance of basically just going on the CMAR and actually just going through and producing those qualification documents along with a lot of those general conditions.
So one of the questions that it's anonymous, and I think you're the best person to answer that, is it's from an owner, and he said he selected CMAR, and the technology provider that they selected, because they basically selected a particular technology, they're not willing to agree to the terms of the contractor because of the consequential damages. So the question is, are they being pushed to the manufacturer? Why are they not signing up? And what's different if he went with the straight design, bid, build?
So I guess from an owner's perspective, I don't know that there really necessarily is a difference. And there could be something that was impacting that based upon whether it's flow down provisions within the contract or potentially the contractor kind of pushing on some of that risk to the suppliers. But generally, my initial thought would be it just becomes more apparent in the collaborative delivery model, because if you were going forward with, say, a design, bid, build, all of that interaction between the supplier and the contractor would have happened before you ever actually got the owner involved. And so you would have never actually seen that back and forth happening with the contractor and supplier.
Okay. Any comments, guys? Mark?
Yeah, well, you mentioned there was some confusion about consequential damages. I think that was your comment.
Well, he's basically saying they're not signing off because the manufacturer is saying, hey, I'm not going to accept the consequential damages. They're being pushed down on them.
In the majority of CMAR, I think this was for a CMAR.
Yes, this was a CMAR.
CMAR delivery, there is a form of mutual waiver of consequential damages between the owner and the CMAR. I said the majority, it's not all, because in some states that's not permitted. if that waiver is in place and each party works out the twos and pros of the risk allocation, it's in the opinion of, I think, of the industry of the whole and the majority of owners in the country, you don't pass that requirement down to suppliers. That's unnecessary. Suppliers need to deliver according to their scope of work and whatever their system is that's intended to use. But to push consequential damages when it's already resolved at the prime contractor level really is not best practice in the industry.
Okay, that's good. I hope the person who asked that liked the answer. So with that, I actually think the next question is probably Trey.
Okay.
Okay, so there are obviously perceived benefits or no benefits, but they would like to know if, in your experience, the three categories that we asked, ability to be involved in the design, budget developments, and accountability for the design build firm, we got a pretty much 53%, 52, and 38. So maybe ability to be involved in the design was an advantage for you, or if you want to address all three of them, that would be great.
Just thinking through the question, I had just a number of benefits that came to mind. We've been working on progressive design build projects for probably 18 years. I've done some 75 projects, varied in size from anywhere from a couple $100,000 to 15 million. So It's been a very varied experience, but having the owner be able to be involved early on has been a huge benefit to that process. And we work with a large residential community, and so one of the specific things that came up was dealing with lighting in terms of how that's going to impact the nearby residential areas. And so having the owner and their specific concerns with relation to that community and being involved was of tremendous benefit. Dealing with controlling odor in residential areas is huge. So the ability for the owner to be able to reach in to the team and talk and just explain the things that they're interested in allowed that team to be able to deliver the product that really met the needs for that particular situation. We've had, I think, one of the huge benefits has been speed of delivery. When you're dealing with progressive design build, we had a circumstance where home sales took a dramatic shift, went from maybe 1,500 a year to over 2,500 a year. So the need for the project to come into place much more quickly was a huge concern. And if we had been in a more standard, design bid build type process, you would not have likely been able to meet the needs of that time frame. So the speed with which the team, if you had the right team, to be able to get together and get that project done on time was just huge for us. In terms of accountability, we have found that if you pick, deal with the right team, someone that has the qualifications, a lot of times.
What do you call the right team?
Well,
can you explain to the audience? You've done so many, probably more than anybody I know. That's why you were selected for this. Not just small and medium, but your number of progressive design build. And the movement right now seems to be progressive design build.
Sure.
So why is that standing out as one of the ways moving forward? Why does that?
Yeah, we've specifically looked for contractors, and the ones that have the qualifications to do these progressive design build type projects are most frequently going to have employed engineers who have been involved in design, have been involved on the construction end, so you get the benefit of both sides of the table. And so they can take those experiences on the design side, combine them with constructability and being able to produce a product, for the owner at a much higher level. And because the team is all together, the engineer's side can learn from some of those constructability standpoints. And, some of the time when you're dealing with a particular firm, they have kind of standards that they follow. If you're looking at a particular engineering company, they may kind of get repetitive in the way that they approach design of a particular type of project. And so when you bring in a contractor and there's a team there, then you get, that contractor has more than likely worked with a number of different engineers, and so you get the benefit of their experience on other projects and other, ways of approaching a problem. And so you really get the best of both worlds. You get the strength of the engineering company as well as the experience of the contractor, in a collaborative method to bring the project out to one that's really beneficial, for the owner.
So if you were a small owner, this is one of the owners is like a 3MGD, I think that's what this community is. And he heard that it takes 10 times more of their time to be involved. And the question is, can I really afford to spend that much time, up front as an owner? Because that's what you're asking them to do, right? In a progressive design build, they're progressing together with the decision makers. So why would that individual go for a progressive design build? What is the benefit he's going to get for the time he puts in?
And I mean, I guess I would say I've not experienced that.
You haven't?
So I would add to that I haven't seen that, well, so we don't do progressive design builds, that's a caveat, but a regular design build, operations and engineering staff from the utility are probably as involved as a progressive design build. So I don't understand why that particular collaborative method would be more of an investment in your time and effort if you're doing the right amount of effort.
In the first place.
In the first place, as a regular design bid build.
Yeah, we've not seen that the progressive type, method has resulted in additional effort.
Okay.
Much of the
That's
time
interesting.
that team is really functioning as an extension, are very involved with the owner. And so we've seen that it actually has reduced the amount of time involvement to get the project built. So.
Okay, that's interesting. So with that in mind, you're not surprised that this is becoming the new flavor of the month?
No, not at all. When you have the strength of both the engineering company as well as the contractor, there's value engineering that happens in the design process. The engineering process is, improved because of the benefits of the contractor's involvement.
Okay.
You don't have to go to the same level of detail in the production. The contractor is very aware of what's going on in the design phase, so it helps you reduce the potential for change orders, reduce requests for information, because they're involved early on. They know the product that they're going to be constructing, and so all those processes are made a lot more, a lot less likely for issues moving forward.
Okay, all right. So with that, Manny, why would you choose any one of these methods as an owner? That you've done a number of different projects. The question was, what do you consider that the impediment and the challenges, to go through one of these delivery methods? We had almost like exactly the same number of responses from our audience on internal procurement policies, organization decision-making, staff resisting to change, and finally, lack of knowledge. I know Mark promotes lack of knowledge is a big thing, and that's what the Design Build Council is doing. But from your perspective, what has been the experience from a very large utility that you got a lot of different
So we are a large
groups?
utility, but most of our work has been design bid build. I think we've been doing collaborative methods for about last 10 years. The ones that come to mind most are two pipeline projects. One which was a micro tunnel that went from City Miami Beach over to Virginia Key. Then there was one that we had that was part of an emergency project. So it was very time critical, and that's why we went with a fixed design build, which was we changed water lines to Virginia Key. Because there was a bridge project. The bridge was, the steelworks underneath it were corroding. So that was really for time or anything else. And then we've done 3 design builds that were on the wastewater treatment plant side. Those are the ones I'm most familiar with. So we did one of our cogeneration system at South District. We're in the process of procuring one for our thickening dewatering for both our South and Central District wastewater treatment plants, and then one that was a VPSA system for our Central District plant. And so I'll kind of first do why we did it that way, and then go over the challenges. So for thickening dewatering was the complexity of the project that we felt that trying to be prescriptive early on in the project was going to hamper kind of more inventiveness with the full scale of the project. In fact, we have changed in our scope as we've gone through procurement. So this is now our second round of procurement for this project. The first round failed at award. The auctionation project, since it was a VPSA, it's a system that we're not very familiar with. In fact, most of our designers also weren't. And the manufactured VPSA systems are very different from each other. So we figured it best for a contractor to team with manufacturers and deliver us that as a product versus us trying to specify one to then find out that maybe that wasn't the most competitively priced one. So that's why we did it that way. Now, where we've had challenges has been all along the way. So we've had challenges with procurement. We've had much to do with lack of knowledge, not just on the county's end and also the selection committee's end, but also our local contractors. Being so familiar with regular design bid build process that when you try to marry that into that knowledge into a fixed design build project, we've had a lot of arguments in the contracting phase.
So just a couple of things here that have been mentioned related to this. There are 3 different structures for teams in design build. And that ultimately gets to the comfort zone of an owner. There is the model that you two have referred to, which is a contractor partnering with an engineer, where the contractor is the prime contractor and the engineer is the subcontractor. Then there are other owners who are very much engineer-centric. They want the engineer in the lead, and they want the contractors, or in the case of some, a general contractor, and others, they want trade contractors, specialty trade contractors as subs. It's another structure. And then there's the integrated joint venture, where the engineering or the design firm partners with the construction firm. And that model seems to have been more prevalent going forward. But in each one of those, there are contract risk issues that are very different than the design bid build. They're very different than CMAR that we were talking about before. The CMAR model, many of the risk allocation can be similar to what's in a design bid build, except that CMAR was selected early on a professional services basis. So the risk allocation in the progressive and the fixed price design build is very different. And the single reason is it is a single point of accountability for the design, construction, commissioning, and startup. And embedded in that is the solution for whatever the project is. And in some cases, Manny was describing pipelines where it's fairly prescriptive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're perfectly happy with it there.
Right. In other cases, they're performance-based. This is generally what I want, but I want this specific outcome. I want this performance from the project. I think you were talking about that at one time. But it's a whole variety of, and then the contracts align with that philosophy expressed by the owner.
So then I would say that our bigger challenge that I've seen as we've progressed through design builds has been in that we have a fixed design build, but our operations and engineering staff are more comfortable with a design bid build, so they try to treat it that way. And they already have you already have a set price by that point.
You do.
So
That sounds like a progressive.
it
They
is.
want to go progressive.
And in
Because
fact,
they're
we
very
would love
involved
to,
in the
except
decision-making.
that's not a contractual method that we have in Miami-Dade County. We really, quite frankly, we only have fixed
But that's
design
what they
builds.
want to do.
Of course, that's what they want. So we found ingenious ways around it, or I shouldn't say around it, but to put the parts that we are most concerned about and that we really want to put our foot down on, we put that into the design build package originally. So our electrical standards we've now put already into the DCP. We don't leave that up to the design builder to make up their mind of how they would want to deliver it to us. And then SCADA and basically control systems, we almost segregate it out and say, don't worry, we'll handle this piece. You deliver the rest of the project, we'll integrate ourselves back in. And,
Sounds like you're in a progression yourselves of
we
changing
are.
models.
We are, because we found that although for the pipeline projects, a fixed design build works fine, we're happy with it. When it came to our treatment plants, we've tweaked it so that we can be more or less happy with it.
More happy.
But we don't want to hand over the control is really the problem. So it's...
Can I add something to that? Because as we're kind of talking through some of this stuff, one of the question about how much involvement the owner has to have, I really think that's kind of dependent upon the contracting method and the delivery approach as much as anything. Because if you're going with, say, a fixed price model, there would be much less involvement from the owner's perspective than, say, if you went to a cost of work model, because the cost of work model itself requires a whole lot of auditing and involvement along with it. But those are the decisions that are made along that way, because kind of to your point, the fixed price kind of ties your hands as far as change orders and stuff like that, where the cost of work kind of gives you a little more flexibility, but it also requires a lot more involvement to actually kind of push that design forward. And
in our case, we don't mind the involvement. We want to be there. So it's
Okay, so with that in mind, one of the owners is saying, I live in a state that none of these models are allowed, and I want to keep them out of here. Is that a reality check for anybody else in the room? I'm going to direct that to you, Mark, because I know you know what states and what states are not allowed.
First of all,
because we said that in the beginning, half of the audience are divided.
right.
Okay, so I'm doing the dirty work by asking these tough questions.
To be clear, and if anybody wants a copy of our research report that addressed where are these delivery methods evolving, it should be very clear. The majority of capital projects in the water market are delivered design, bid, build, the majority. However, the market size now is somewhere between $6 and $8 billion a year of collaborative delivery projects. I can state definitively, when I joined my former employer and started their construction business, we started off with a maximum project of $100,000. We were opposed internally.
Wow.
That market has evolved. And the point to understand now, there are two seminal projects that I think, if they're successful, and we're too early to know, they will change the impression across the country and with legislation. One is a progressive design build new water treatment plant in Houston, Texas, $1.76 billion. Never in my right imagination when I started doing progressive design build in the early 90s that I ever contemplate a project of that size. Likewise, San Francisco PUC is now moving forward in deploying thermal hydrolysis and new digestion at their main wastewater plant. And the value of that contract, I've heard numbers anywhere from $1 to $2 billion, depending on the breadth of the scope. CMAR. And so when one thinks that, gee, this isn't right, I go back to the data that still the majority are done design, bid, build. However, more owners, more of the large owners, that's where the marketing has occurred. Owner to owner, it's not company to owner, it's owner to owner. When owners achieve a success in using any of these delivery methods, and we've got a good spectrum here on the stage, they're telling the neighboring utility, I tried this method, here's what I did, as long as it conforms to state law and your procurement ordinance, why don't you give it a try, test it out? And what's happened is that has precipitated an increase in the use of these delivery methods. And right now, the use of these delivery methods is increasing anywhere from 10 to 12% a year on a compound annual growth rate. If you look at that going forward in the next 10 years, more than 50% of the capital projects in the water market, that's water and wastewater, more than likely will be delivered with these methods.
Okay, so that ties back to a question from an engineer, but I'm going to ask you, Trey,
Okay.
that question.
Can I add one thing?
Oh, absolutely.
To
Yes.
tag on to what Mark had to say. I think, there's certainly nothing wrong with staying with the traditional
No.
design, bid, build. It's not like you can't get a project done. But, with any, major shifts or different directions you can take, you get benefits from those.
Sure.
Some of the things I mentioned. If having a higher degree of owner involvement or, having some of those flexibilities are not critical to the kind of work you're doing, then there's no problem with not having that change. But, we just experienced, let's take advantage of those benefits. And,
Okay.
so it's been great.
The VPSA project, we wouldn't have wanted to do that design bid build because we really didn't know what we wanted in the sense that we didn't know enough about VPSA systems to say, oh yes, we want to be that involved in picking the system.
Yeah, we had that happen on a project for looking at the particular, type of process equipment at a wastewater plant where we were heading down one road, and in the process of some of that early on pricing, found that the way the project was designed was around a particular process.
And that's what we didn't want.
We had some issues with that provider.
Yeah.
And because it was a progressive design build type project, we were able to shift, move away from them, go with a different technology, and then have kind of standardized on that technology for the last 15 years. And so it's been, had it been a more traditional process, we would not have had that same level of flexibility.
Okay, so this one is from an engineer who works for an engineering firm. And he says, I did not see why my firm will benefit working on a progressive design build project. As an engineer, why should I do it?
Well, if you look at it solely from the perspective of, is my firm going to build the most money, then they're probably right.
Okay.
You don't have to generate the same level of specs. You're not generating the same level of plans. So solely from that perspective, they're probably correct. But, I guess I've always looked at it maybe from a little different perspective. You can take any set of circumstances and look at it from a different side and get a different idea. But, to the point I made earlier, when you are teamed up with a construction company that has some of that expertise of engineering as well as construction, we have seen that the design products coming out of that engineering company have improved, have gotten better, have gotten stronger.
So there's that collaboration and learning happens
Absolutely.
actually in between the teams.
You know,
That's what you guys are saying.
I agree with that. It helps.
And you
develop
worked for
that
a
design.
consultant,
Yeah, I've worked
Derek.
for a consultant.
You worked for a consultant for a number of years before
Yeah.
you went to the city.
But I mean, it's more of a question of what's the interest? Is it the interest of the engineer to earn money, or is it the interest of the engineer to build and deliver the project and look out for the owner's interest? And I guess now that I'm sitting in the owner's chair, I would hope that it's looking out for the owner's interest.
You're
It's
right.
all
When you were
perspective.
sitting in your other chair, what did you feel?
It's all
It
perspective.
might have been a little different.
So I would say that it gives them access to more projects too. I mean, because
It does.
the VPSA project I'm talking about, that's a $60 million project. So the design fees on that, even if they are curtailed a bit because you're dealing directly with the manufacturer and a lot of it's already designed out,
Yeah.
I mean, there's still plenty of trade discipline work that you're going to do. So you want to really say, okay, I'm not interested in that project, or the thickening dewatering project, that's going to be north of $150 million. We're looking at probably a design fee that's going to be $14, $15 million. You want to just give that up to some other firm instead? I mean,
It's the decision making.
Yeah.
He doesn't feel obviously he's going to make any decisions. He's going to have somebody else tell him what to do, and he doesn't like that. So the question
he's still going to
is-
get to design.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to get a look
Yeah.
in design build or in CMAR or in P3. You're still going to get a complete design of
Yeah.
some form or fashion. And so the fact that what I was suggesting is the data shows the market's changing, engineering education is changing, where more engineers are being trained to understand and be more sensitive to the construction process. And then what happens is new grads either take the path of going 3 paths. One is into technology, one is into construction, one is into engineering. But the bottom line is you have to have a design to develop the basis of a project. So I would say to anyone who asks the question, what's my benefit? My benefit as a professional engineer is I contributed to a solution. That's where I think where all of you are going, because the ultimate goal is not to design and draw lines and develop specifications ad infinitum. It's to develop a design product that can lead to a successful project that meets the owner needs. That's what's critical here. And I think that takes a different thought process to say, now I understand, because it was interesting, we were asking the question of if you were on the private side working for an owner versus you're on the owner side. I think both sides should have a common interest, successful project. When they don't have common interest, that's when disputes and claims and other things occur, and frankly, everyone gets frustrated.
Okay, so the question that one of the guys is asking, for 150 years, we did just fine, and we didn't have any collaborative models. They did in Europe. Why now?
Why now?
Innovation, maybe?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think part of it is there are opportunities. Your company and many others bringing innovative solutions that couldn't be addressed in a design-bid-build, but could be addressed in design-build, because in design-build, not only is it single point of accountability, but there is a performance guarantee at the end of the contract. So that project will perform as intended, incorporating your innovative technology or someone else's. And that really was the beginning of using design-build, and the fixed price was the model. And those owners that looked for innovation as their comfort zone, they went to fixed price, but they had a very hard performance guarantee. So when the dynamics of the engineering firm, the construction firm, the technology firm came together, they too had to have common interest. There was a lot of testing of each other to make sure the innovative solution would work at the end and meet the owner's needs. And I think that has benefited the technology applications dramatically, because I can go back early in my career where EPA was supporting something they called innovative and alternative technology, without a lack of bringing the 3 parties who deliver a project together with a common interest. And many times those technologies didn't meet the owner's needs.
Okay, so it's 6:30. If we can turn the lights
I will
on
say I
and
have a question for
ask
the
the
panel.
question. Oh, I'm sorry. You have a question?
Yes. So,
Okay, go for it.
With our last 2 design builds, the level of competitiveness really hasn't been there. We've had two teams. In both cases, at some point, one team dropped out. We were left with one team going through the whole procurement process. What do you guys feel you could do or could be done to increase the level of competitiveness in these sort of projects?
Wow. Well, some of that goes to education. This is what you were referring to. There's not enough contractors and not enough engineers, et cetera, who understand these delivery methods so they'd be more comfortable participating in the development. And every survey we've done, because this is still an emerging delivery method, education and training of owners and the practitioners, whether they're engineers, construction firms, or technology firms, how their role works, how their risks change, and how they are to function, even in the first phase, which is responding to procurement documents that look different than plans and specs in a design bid build.
And I guess I should have specified. So we have a 2-step procurement process.
Yeah.
So we'll have an RFQ and then an RFP.
Right.
The RFP has both a qualitative and a hard bid price.
Right,
So, yeah.
right. And,
Derek, did you want to ask about the stipend fee? We were talking about that a while ago. Did you want to
the
ask
stipend.
the question about
Oh,
this?
the stipend. Oh, no. So what we were actually talking about was kind of whether or not a stipend should be included within a design-build procurement. And I guess talking through it, my personal opinion is that stipends are an important part of that. Now, I know they're not always included, but from an owner's perspective, one of the reasons that I personally believe a stipend is important is because it really provides the owner with the rights to the intellectual property that was developed as a part of that procurement. So as you start doing bid evaluations between different designs, you may not necessarily select a firm that you think had all the best ideas for one reason or another, but if you had that stipend as a part of that procurement, it also gives you the right to be able to take some of those best ideas and incorporate it.
In return for the stipend.
In return for the stipend, yeah. But there's a secondary benefit too, is it really actually provides, I'm going to say, incentive for firms to go after it, because there is a very large cost associated with a lot of these procurements, and it kind of helps, incentivize as much as anything firms going after those procurements.
But that's answered to
I
Manny.
think so,
Because Manny was asking, how do you bring more teams
Yeah, and
to the
that
table?
May be,
Maybe
something
they
that's
got
helpful.
paid for that.
But I would also think it's something maybe over time, because as more firms and contractors become familiar with the delivery method, it's going to basically make more experienced professionals.
So with that, if we don't have any more comments, I want to thank all of you. I think it was a very good discussion. I mean, you guys have reasons why you promote some of these ideas, and the challenges are there. It seems like we still have people who like CMAR, progressive. You want to get out of fixed. So maybe you can follow
Fix
one
is
of
good
these.
for some, but I don't think it's necessarily good for all the products that we
Right.
go after
Right.
with that.
And I think from an Ovivo point of view, we do, in some states, about half of them are collaborative models right now. Like you said, Florida is about 50-50. In some states, it's 90%. And in some states, it's getting closer to 30-40%. So this is very important for us as a technology provider to make sure that we can be a partner to the teams, that they are basically supporting those models. And to make sure, from my point of view, I want to make sure we don't stop innovation, that this is not going to cripple innovation, because that is the value that Ovivo brings. And I don't want us to stop innovating, because I think we can be a partner if the opportunity lends itself for Ovivo to be part of it.
Well, we really didn't talk about P3s, and I think that was my fault. I was supposed to mention that. But that's where a lot of innovation can happen. So
Yes, we do all of our Canadian projects just about our P3.
Right.
But that's where the value, the operations and maintenance, the long-term maintenance parts of good high-level technology provides. But we don't see that many of them. You've done a couple, but
yeah, so I've had one
found
that's
it very
been
hard to
lingering for
find
10
anybody.
years, and it still hasn't gotten out of
Exactly,
procurement. But in that project, we would kind of go the same route of electrical gear. We would
Right.
specify it very clearly.
Sure.
But since it's for a biosolids project of a product that we don't want to market ourselves, we are quite open to innovation on that
Okay.
project if it ever really gets out on the street.
okay. So P3 is another way. High-quality maintenance, you get a lot of credit for that. Okay, guys, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
So, thank you, everybody.